Yeah. So the conservative orthodoxy had been that cutting taxes is like the reward that you get after cutting spending. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's after a healthy meal.
Right. That, after you've had your, austerian, vegetables, then you can have the ice cream of tax cuts. But then there were, Laffer and these other right-wing economists, some of whom were like really strange and colorful kooks, who convinced the Republicans that you didn't have to do it that way.
Yeah. One of the kookiest was Jude Wanniski, who was a editorial writer for the Wall Street Journal, who claimed to have learned everything he needed to know about economics as a card counter in Las Vegas. Yeah. And then, Arthur Laffer himself, who'd been kicked out of government for these incredibly embarrassing failed budget projections for Richard Nixon. And this guy, Mundell, who kind of grew his hair long and moved to, like, I don't know, Bahamas and a parrot on his shoulder or something like that. I don't remember quite the details. But yes, this was supply side economics. And, the basic predicate of this was, the Keynesian nostrums in the middle of the 70s suddenly seemed not to be working, right? So there was a real kind of intellectual opportunity for those who, wanted to discredit, activist government itself. And there are all sorts of kind of economic, battles going on about who on the right really would be the people to, kind of write the future paradigm, and in a sense, people like Milton Friedman, Ben Stein, these were the good guys because they were the ones who were like, these supply side guys, like, are making no sense at all. And they would, basically write these articles that had, no economic models, but they would say as a matter of faith, this was the Laffer Curve. That if
so do you want to say what exactly that is?
The Laffer Curve. So Arthur Laffer was this kind of discredited supply side economist, discredited among other economists, right, who came back, by the way, for the age of Trump. But he came up with this thing called the Laffer Curve, in which he said that, well, if your tax rate is 0%, you're going to get zero revenue. And if your tax rate is 100%, you're going to get zero revenue because no one will work if they have to pay all their money in taxes. But there's this magic point where those, kind of two extremes cross. That is the ideal tax rate that will maximize revenue. And that cross point is, way, 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 way below what we have now. And if we lower taxes to that magical rate, you literally will have an explosion of economic activity that will actually increase revenue to the government. And you won't have to cut anything, right? And Jude Wanniski was kind of the most brilliant sort of phrase maker of this group. And he referred to this as the two Santa Claus theory. So there was this old saying in Republican politics that, this is why we can't beat these Democrats. No one shoots Santa Claus. Right. And this is an old style of Democratic politics that in a lot of ways, Joe Biden has kind of tried to bring back. It's basically the government is Santa Claus. The government writes you checks. It redistributes income. One way it did this was, for example, to bring it back to Jimmy Carter, was public works projects like dams, that weren't always necessary, but not only created a lot of great blue collar jobs for people who didn't have college degrees, but they made these amazing lakes where you could go fishing, right? So if I'm a big fishing fan. So if you go across the South, there's all these wonderful lakes that look like overgrown rivers that are named after dead Democratic senators, right? Because those are the guys who kind of appropriated the funds. So that's Santa Claus. And Jude Wanniski's like, we can't beat him at this game, but we got our own Santa Claus. We get to lower everyone's taxes. And one of the ideas behind slow supply side taxes was it wasn't just, we're going to lower the capital gains rate, although that was certainly part of it. It wasn't just we're going to lower the top marginal rate, although that was part of it. The idea was we're going to cut taxes across the board. And the way this ended up manifesting was a bill to cut taxes by 30 percentage points over 3 years. And of course, unfortunately, for these guys, since we have a progressive tax system, that helps out rich people a lot more than it helps poor people, right? Because it's not a progressive cut. But nonetheless, what you could say to every American who has an income and pays income taxes, which was most by 1977, 78, 79, and 1980, was that, you get a tax cut, and you get a tax cut, and you get a tax cut, and you get a tax cut. Oh, and these guys, they want to raise your taxes, right? And lo and behold, here comes Jimmy Carter, who gets elected. I've actually reviewed this history, researched it for a review I'm doing of a new Jimmy Carter biography, and he was absolutely adamant that no one would have to sacrifice anything under a Carter presidency. One of the last debate he had with Gerald Ford was the moderator, being a good, kind of elite journalist, let's say, under your presidency, how are you going to ask Americans to sacrifice? And Gerald Ford says, well, people are probably going to have to sacrifice. This is tough times. And Jimmy Carter says, basically, he kind of hems and haws, and he has one of those answers that you can tell they don't want to answer, right? Because he doesn't really use grammatical sentences. But he starts out saying, under a Carter presidency, people will have to sacrifice much less. And one of the things he does in basically his first weeks as president was he unilaterally announces 55 dam projects that he's canceling. And he doesn't tell any of the politicians whose political careers rely upon this particular Santa Claus. And he doesn't tell his interior secretary, who gets off a plane at a governor's meeting and is nearly, nearly horsewhipped by a bunch of governors who are going to lose their dams.
Right.
And so one side has Santa Claus and the other side has Scrooge. And that was Jimmy Carter's doing.
Yeah, she mentioned, by the way, so that the Laffer Curve, one of the things you mentioned in the book is that...
it's also complete BS, right? I mean, obviously, I don't need to tell your intelligent listeners that, it was completely made up and didn't work.
Yes, yeah, I mean, this is something that that Laffer came up with, he was at a meeting with Dick Cheney, right? And he
wrote on the back of a napkin. He's like, let me show you, Dick. And then he goes to this fancy expense account restaurant with starched linen napkins. And he's like, oh, damn. Then he sees there's cocktail napkins at the bar. And famously, he writes it down. And Dick Cheney is chief of staff for Gerald Ford, and he's trying to convince, unsuccessfully as it turns out, Gerald Ford, what he was able to convince Ronald Reagan, which was a very Reaganite idea. A miracle of the loaves and fishes, that you just unleash the American people's native genius and, get rid of the dead hand of government, and next thing everyone in the streets are paved with gold.
You have been watching a free public preview for a patron exclusive episode of Give Them an Argument. To get the rest of this episode, plus patron exclusive episodes every single Thursday, as well as patron exclusive post games after the regular show every Monday night, and a lot more, head over to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. As a friend of mine used to put it, why be foolish?